Okay, let's try to create a project and see if we can get Java to connect to our database. Now that we have NetBeans configured, we have our SQL Server configured, let's create a new project. We're going to make a Java with Ant application, and I'll call it Test the Database. You can call yours whatever you want. This is just a demo to see if we can do it. So here is our new project, and I'm going to get rid of some of this excess code here, and we'll just concentrate. I'll make my font a little bit bigger so it's easier to read. And the first thing we're going to do is set, well, actually, let's do this all in a try block. There's a try. Here's a catch. And let's catch general exceptions. And if something happens, for troubleshooting purposes, let's just print, oops. And then we'll concatenate on the text from the exception. That should give us enough. If we do get some exceptions, we'll get to see what they are. And I am expecting one. So let's start making our database connection inside this try block. So let's declare a string. We'll call it username. And we'll use test user, because that's the user we set up on our server. Okay. And we'll also set up a string for the password called pass. And we'll put 1, 2, 3, 4 because that was the password we were going to use for our test database here. All right, the next thing we want to do, let's set up a string. And actually, I am going to show you where to find this. So let's set up a string. We'll call it SQL, SQL, equals. Okay, and I'm going to show you where to find this string. This will be the JDBC address for our SQL server. So how do we find that? Let's go back over here to services, and in our JDBC connection that we know works, let's right click on it and hit properties. Now you can look right here in the display name is a pretty good place to find this, but it's also in the database URL here. You can pick either one of those. If you click the little ellipsis next to it, it opens up, and we only need up to the question mark is the address of our server. We're going to use JDBC to connect to MySQL at this address, localhost 3306. That address could be anywhere in the world if we wanted it to be. But this is our local host on our computer, and we're connecting to the world database. So we're going to copy that little piece right there. I'm going to hit Control-C, and that's the string we want to use. So you can pull that right out of your connections where we did this JDBC connection that we know works. We know this connection works, so we can use this address. And we can come over here, and I pasted that in. All right. Then we need a connection string. And we'll call it con. Excuse me, I am not ready for that yet. We also need to do class.forName. And inside there, we have to give a class name for our JDBC driver. So where do we find that? I need to spell class correctly. Okay, so where are we going to find this string? We're going to go back over to services. We're going to right click and we're going to say properties. And we can find the driver class right here, com.mysql.cj.jdbc driver. If I hit the ellipsis, I can just come in here and copy that. Okay, Control C to copy it. Okay. So that's our driver class. Yours should match that. If you've done everything the way I have, yours should match that. And we'll stick that in here. All right, so let me put some comments in here to remind you where these things come from. This was the first part of the display name. It's where we retrieve this address. You may want to put these in because when you set up your own, it'll remind you where to get those. You can go back to this. And then this one came from the JDBC connection. Driver class is the field we looked at for that. Okay. Now we need to set up our connection. So we'll make a connection. We're going to call that connection con. And we are going to do driver manager dot get connection. And in get connection, we have to specify the server we want to connect to. So we're going to put SQL, which was this variable we set up right here. And we're going to say the username, which we had set up here, and the password. Okay. Now, we can see some big red squiggles here because this program doesn't know anything about connections. So, and if you look, this is one of those times where just taking the first suggestion here may not be your best bet. So it's going to import Sun JDI connection. We don't want that one. So let's talk about what connections we need. We need to import. Let's go up here. And we want to import java.sql.connection. And we also want to import java.sql.driver manager. And now it's starting to complete some things for us. And I have a problem because I can't spell manager correctly. So the rest of my problems went away. I imported java.sql.connection, java.sql.driver manager. So we're setting up some strings for these things that are going to get used right here. And this is actually going to create our connection. And the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to print success if it works, right to the console. If something in here doesn't work, it's probably going to throw an exception and tell us about it down here. So let's go ahead and run this. Oh, and it says, oops, so we have a problem. Java language class not found exception. It can't find the driver. That's the same driver that we used before when we set up our test connection from services. We also need to do it here. So for this package to work, we have to tell it about that and add that jar file to the libraries for this program. So this connection we made using services. It gave us a lot of the settings we need, and we were able to test. But it's not actually going to use this. We need to tell this program to use that same driver that we already loaded when we did this test over here. So we want to take that driver that we saw before that we extracted, and we want to put it somewhere in our project. So I am going to get that up and show you where I'm going to put it. I'm going to pause for a second while I snoop around my computer and I'll get the File Explorer windows up. All right, so here's the jar file that we had used before. Remember, I had it in my downloads folder when so I'm going to copy this jar file. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to say copy. Okay, now I'm going to go over to my project. Okay, so here's my project on my computer. I have it in my documents folder under NetBeans projects, and here's my project called Test the Database. I'm going to go, technically I think you can put it anywhere. I'm going to just put it in my library folder. I'm going to put that connector in there. And then we can go back, now that we have it in there somewhere, we can add it. All right, so come back to your project screen. We're in our application here. We want to come down here to libraries, and we're going to right click and we're going to add a jar file, or you can be adding a folder, but we're adding a jar. And we're going to go in and find, so mine was in NetBeans projects. This was called Test the Database, and I put it in my library folder, and there's my SQL connector. We're going to reference that. I'm going to reference it as a relative path. I think that should be okay. And I will say open. And there's one other thing we want to check. I'm going to right click on my database and I'm going to say properties. I'm going to go down here to build packaging. And I want to check to make sure this copy dependent libraries is checked. Okay. And it should be by default, but if yours isn't, go ahead and check it. Okay. And we'll just say, okay. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click the clean and build the project. Clean and build. It's the hammer with the little broom next to it. Clean and build. It basically resets the entire project and tells it to use all these this library that we just added here. So let's clean and build the project. And then let's try to run it. And this time we have success. Okay. So copy the jar file into your project somewhere. I used the library folder. Okay. Then go to your libraries and add the jar file, and then also check to see that copy dependent libraries was checked in your project build packaging section. And then you should have a good connection. We have a good connection. When I run this, we're getting here. This is working. It created the connection. It didn't fail. We didn't get an exception. So we have to assume at this point that our connection worked. Now we can try to run a query, and I'll save that for the next video.